In last week's video, we talked about what spirituality is, as it is not easy to put a definition to such a broad term. But spirituality tends to involve a connection to something greater than oneself, and a seeking of beauty and truth. Probably my favorite definition of spirituality is the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, and the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. Spirituality is such a broad term that there really aren't any rules. Anything you do that helps you create a connection and greater sense of understanding of the divine is a spiritual practice, and no one can tell you that it's not. It's not necessarily about what you do, it's the intention you have behind it. So if you hop on spiritual trends such as Kundalini Yoga or getting into healing crystals just because it's popular and the trendy thing to do and you want to fit in, the chance of that practice having a spiritual benefit on you is much lower than if you started doing the practice because you actually knew beforehand how it could help you and you had proper intentions before getting started. What I see in a lot of New Age gurus is they tell you what you should and shouldn't do, what is and isn't a spiritual practice, what's true and what's not. They communicate their message in a way that seems like what they say is absolutely true. And while their guidance can certainly be helpful to an extent, it is important to remember at the end of the day that the messages they communicate are based on conclusions they've come to from their own experiences, and someone else might not come to those conclusions from their own experiences. Spirituality is about direct experience. No two persons' spiritual journeys are the same. When you walk the spiritual path, you walk alone. You can do whatever you want to maintain your spirituality, and as I said earlier, it's not about what you do, it's why you do it. True spirituality involves the seeking of greater understanding, and a large part of that is breaking down limiting beliefs you've carried your whole life. An example of this could be deciding to leave your religion and explore other possibilities of connecting to the divine. Fake spirituality would be getting so lost in religious or spiritual dogma that you stop being in awe at the wonder of existence and believe whatever the religion says without a second thought. Another aspect of spirituality is confronting darkness. Everyone has aspects of themselves they don't like. Many people have undergone some form of traumatic experience that they may have repressed for years. True spirituality involves confronting the darkest parts of oneself, accepting it and letting it go. Coming to terms with the darkest parts of oneself can be painful, but the continued repression of that darkness would not be true spirituality. In 1984, psychologist John Wellwood coined the term spiritual bypassing, which is defined as a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. Spiritual bypassing could involve overly emphasizing the positive rather than the negative, being overly idealistic and pretending everything is okay even when it's not. It's basically toxic positivity and complete ignorance to the problem. Spirituality does not ignore darkness. It recognizes it's there and comes to terms with it. It's commonly said that desire is one's greatest hindrance on the spiritual journey. While that is true for desires of the ego, such as money, sex, material items, high status, and more, other forms of desire comes in during one's spiritual journey. Spirituality involves the shift from ego desires to divine desires, such as the seeking of truth. For many people, including a few New Age so-called gurus, I won't list any names, spirituality has become a self-sabotaging, ego-filling trap. Maybe some people feel superior to or think they're more woke than others because they're vegan, or because they meditate every day, or because they take psychedelics. The whole point of spirituality is a seeking of connection, or a sense of oneness to something higher than oneself. The divine, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it. And the reason you don't feel like you have that connection is because of the ego. You have to remember that the ego is a mechanism that evolved that causes us to view ourselves as separate from everything else. You have to make a clear distinction of self and other, or else you would not be able to survive. When one truly walks the spiritual path, they let many aspects of the ego go, the very part of themselves inhibiting them from having this sense of greater connection to the divine. The ego and a sense of connection to something greater have a seesaw-like relationship. The bigger one's ego is, the less of a connection they have. The weaker one's ego is, the greater connection they have. When someone is seeking enlightenment, they're seeking a complete transcendence of the ego. In this state, there is zero sense of self, only oneness with everything that exists. So when someone feels superior to someone spiritually, whether it's because they're vegan or because they take psychedelics, they're missing the entire point. They're creating further boundaries between the self and other, which is the exact opposite of what spirituality is trying to do. I've dealt with this spiritual superiority complex myself in the past, and still do from time to time. If you ever sense that I'm talking down to you in my videos, or claiming myself as more enlightened, or knowledgeable, or capable than you, you probably should not take what I said that seriously. I'm a big fan of direct experience, and personally, no ego attached, I think psychedelics are a fantastic way to have a direct, spiritual experience because they break the ego down and increasingly dissolve the boundary between self and others the higher the dose gets. If you're interested in taking them though, make sure you do your research and obtain information from a variety of sources so you know that trying a psychedelic is the right decision, because there can be drawbacks to taking them and they're not for everyone. And also, when it comes to astrology, many people associate it with spirituality, and while I've never been interested at all in astrology and don't know much about it, it's full of labels that one can adopt for the view of themselves that can be very limiting, only feed the ego, and also promote spiritual bypassing. If you justify doing this because you're a Virgo or doing that because you're a Pisces, you're playing yourself. In last week's video, we talked about spirituality as encompassing religion, as religion is merely a limited, dogmatic way of thinking, whereas if one had no attachments to one way of thinking, they can relay their experiences in whatever way they please. Astrology is basically the same thing. You're given a sign based on your birthday that is somehow supposed to predict your future and predict what personal qualities you have, based on nothing but the stars and planetary orientation. It's kind of like a religion, limiting and dogmatic. It's important that you feel like you're the driver of your life, not your religion or your horoscope. We don't want to be blaming any negative emotions on your religion or your astrological sign. That's spiritual bypassing. Seek to deal with that negativity you have from within. That pretty much concludes this video. If there's one thing I want you to take away, it's that spirituality is all about direct experience. No one should tell you what you can or can't do when it comes to spirituality. And like I said earlier, it's not about what you do, it's why you do it. Don't let yourself fall into that ego trap in which you come to believe you're superior to others because of your spiritual practices. Don't get lost in one way of thinking. Stay radically open-minded, never stop asking questions, and never cease to be in awe at the wonder of your existence. If you do those things, you'll find yourself being a very spiritual person. One last thing. I recently just launched my Patreon, where I will be holding a book club for $3 a month. We'll be reading one book a month based on topics we go over in this channel, and we'll be engaging in deep discussions on them. I have other tiers also where there will be more benefits. So if you're interested, consider joining the Patreon. That's all I have today for you guys, and as always, have a great day and peace.